in the late 1990s, what you call grooming gangs in the UK, in the Netherlands, they were called lover boys.
Elon Musk has exposed the truth behind the grooming gangs in the UK. Ayaan Hirsi offers her thoughts in this interview.
Said that this isn't to do with people's religion or even ethnicity.
It has to do with people's ethnicity and with people's religion. And that's the core of the problem. So instead of protecting these victims, vulnerable girls, some of them as young as 9 years old, we fret about what to label it, what to call the problem. In the case of the UK, that many of them are of Pakistani origin and some of them Bangladeshi, but there are also other ethnic groups.
I think Ayaan hits on something important here. Refusing to call it for what it is doesn't help. We have to recognize that there are aspects of this that are, unfortunately, endorsed, or at least seen as endorsed in their holy books. This isn't to say that this is the case for all people who practice this religion. We all know adherents to this religion that are great individuals. But you could argue that this is in spite of what their holy books teach. It's becoming harder to ignore that whenever we see these kinds of stories happening, they tend to keep happening in specific types of communities. Why is that? I don't think Ayan's mention of 9-year-old girls is accidental. If you are a little familiar with Islam, then you know the story about the Prophet and Aisha and how old she was. There seems to be a pattern.
The UK, that many of them are of Pakistani origin and some of them Bangladeshi, but there are also other ethnic groups. In the case of the Netherlands, I lived in the Netherlands in the late 1990s. What you call grooming gangs in the UK, in the Netherlands, they were called lover boys. And it was young Muslim men, mostly of Moroccan origin, who did the exact same thing, who went and struck up relationships with young girls in very poor neighborhoods, white working class neighborhoods, and then gave them the impression that they were boyfriend and girlfriend, and then gave them presents, giving the impression to the young girl that her boyfriend cared so much and was seeking a life of commitment, and then found themselves pimped in the red light districts in Amsterdam and other areas where young women are sold into prostitution. When you look at the stories in Sweden and Germany, what you see are these gangs, many of them related to one another, blood relations of one another, preying on young women.
Stop me if you heard this before. No, seriously. Who does this sound like? This is essentially what Andrew Tate is being accused of. And guess who just recently claimed to be an adherent of this particular religion? This whole thing is heartbreaking, right? It's horrible. And what makes it worse is the attempt to cover it up, the refusal to call it for what it is, and the continued attempts to try to blame the victims, blame shifting. This is plainly just unacceptable. People need to be held accountable for this. The people that are executing these kinds of crimes and the people that were trying to cover it up. There needs to be an accountability that takes place. Recently, here in the States, there was an attack, and the initial reports were refusing to call it a terrorist attack. They were unwilling to discuss the potential connection between the man and this particular religious group. They tried to downplay the fact that he had a particular kind of flag in his car that represents terrorism. Again, notice the emphasis on young girls. I think this goes back to what they see their prophet do in their scriptures.
Is there something in the Quran? Is there something about the religion that made them do this, or is the religion irrelevant?
The religion is relevant, but the religion doesn't say go rape. I tried to explain the complexity of the angle where the religion is relevant in my book in Pray when I was trying to document this problem. These young men come from a different society with a different way of life, and it is an Islamic way of life, doctrinally, but also culturally. The relationship between men and women in these parts of the world is governed by this honor and shame code. Women stay out of the public eye. When they come into the public eye, they're chaperoned and they're covered from head to toe. because the expectation is that men will behave like animals, either individually or in groups, and attack women. And so when you talk to the imams and you say, it's men should be taught to control their sexual urges, the imam will say, actually, it's women who should stay out of sight. It's women who should cover themselves up. They are the ones who should not put themselves in vulnerable positions.
When I heard this, it immediately brought to mind Nancy Pearcey's recent book on masculinity. One of the things that she shows in that book is that shortly after the Industrial Revolution, this view or idea of men having animalistic tendencies was becoming more expected and, in a lot of ways, accepted, accepted as the new norm. The idea was that men were barbarians. At the core, men are animals. This quote from the book that she references, this is George Gilder's book, Sexual Suicide. Men are, by nature, violent, sexually predatory, and irresponsible. This book was written in 1973, and he points back to evolutionary psychology as support for this view. This is essentially what some current day imams are promoting. I'm currently reading a book dealing with some of the atrocities that took place in the ancient Near East, and we see how some of the things done then are to an extent being repeated now. We don't have to look that far. We read or saw what happened with Hamas.
Craved, and everyone left and right is looking the other way, except individuals like Tommy Robinson, but then he's in prison.
What do you think it says about British society that this issue was, first of all, covered up by the authorities? And you can look at every single layer, whether it was the police or the social administration, even some parents. Everyone let down these children, politicians, the media, and so on. What does it say, as I say, morally about British society that was allowed to happen, and that this issue was first of all covered up, and then second of all ignored, and actively ignored by the establishment in many cases? Can you talk a bit about our secular society, a bit about liberalism and modern Britain and morality?
So I have a Canadian friend called Gad Sad, and he describes it as suicidal empathy, which he doesn't say it's exclusively a problem that ails Britain, but apparently it's the entire West that is determined to commit cultural suicide. Yes, we do live in these post-Christian times where, again, to go back to the assimilation issue, assimilating to what? So if we were to deny them and to say, well, you can't practice Sharia law here, and you can't keep your way of life here, then when you come to Britain, what does it mean to be British? So normally what that would mean would be to teach them, to draw them into adopting Christian morality. But we live in this post-Christian world where morality itself has become quite diffuse. A lot of people just really take it for granted that you don't rape and that you don't attack women on the streets. And
so I think this is the crux of it. The fact that this was known and so widely ignored, right? It wasn't like this was something that was happening and they just weren't aware of it. No, they knew about it. They just chose to ignore it. Think about it. Tommy Robinson did a whole documentary about this and was basically put in jail. Jordan Peterson had Tommy Robinson on probably about a few months ago now, and he brought this same topic up. And I listened to it, and to be honest, when I'm hearing it, I'm like, nah, this can't be true. There's got to be some stuff here that isn't quite correct. And then I did a Google search, and it didn't take a lot of digging. You typed it up, and the results, I mean, it was overwhelming. I looked at a couple articles, and it was horrible. That was enough for me. I didn't want to keep digging. It's bad. If you've seen some of the stuff that Elon Musk has been posting on Twitter, the articles are just as bad, perhaps worse. This is the part that's even more shocking, right? Who would have thought that if it wasn't for Elon Musk, this would have likely stayed under wraps? Elon Musk, the beacon of morality. It's crazy to think that he's the one making most sense right now. As far as the morals of society goes, in this conversation, they're particularly focused on the UK. But here in the States, it's not much different. A lot of what we see going on there is happening here, and vice versa. When we no longer have a foundation for morality, then it's just a matter of opinion. It's a free-for-all. I think she's correct when she mentions that this has been taken for granted, right? This idea of morality, the fact that people everywhere know right from wrong, or at least that they should. Without the foundation, it's all just a matter of what you think is right or wrong. And here in the West, for years now, they've been chipping away at that foundation. And now we are starting to see some of those consequences and realizing that we don't like them.
What the voters want you to do: close the borders and integrate or assimilate these immigrants, and those who do not want to assimilate them, remove them from the country.
What does that look like practically? Does that mean banning Sharia courts, for example? What kind of policies would you propose?
It is absolutely outrageous that we have Sharia courts. That is a parallel system. So which system, what is the British system? What is British law? What is German law? What is, Swedish law? And what does that say? So you've allowed an entire parallel system to take place of a population that has refused to assimilate. Again, not all of them, but many of them. And the numbers are going to grow either through the birth rate or through more immigration. So what does that mean? Of course, you have to abolish Sharia law. It should never have been allowed to begin with. You have to have only one system that applies to everyone equally. That is what British law, British common law, is about that.
I didn't even know this was a thing. Like, what are we doing? This is crazy. So essentially, they had a whole subversive government and society running alongside the established government. No wonder things have gotten as bad as they are. Based on what she is describing here, sounds like if you held to this religious view, you were held accountable to a different set of laws. Just consider how nonsensical this is. One has to wonder how this has lasted as long as it has under this structure. It's amazing that the government has been able to stay running with all this happening, just below the surface. It truly makes no sense. The goal is to be just in your ruling, right? When it comes to government, the government's job is to be just, right? To make sure that justice is being done. This is what we see in Romans 13. Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God.
With Trump 2.0, the new team is not going to buy that nonsense.
He's got some very strong people around him on the issue of Islamic extremism. What kind of levers can he pull to tackle Islamic extremism in the United States, and how can he prevent future attacks like this? I know you've talked a little bit about maybe using Doge, but perhaps he should be deporting radical imams. I mean, look, I interviewed some pretty radical people in Detroit with links to the Iranian regime. I think it's extraordinary that some of those imams are even in the United States. So what kind of levers can Trump pull to prevent this stuff?
I think Trump can start a paradigm shift on this whole thing. And it's not only what he can do inside the United States, but it's what he can do in the United States and outside of the United States. He's got this golden opportunity where the key Muslim country in the world, Saudi Arabia, is aligned with him on bringing down and eliminating the ideology of Islamism.
I didn't even know this. This whole idea, or just to think that there are a group of radical imams in Detroit that, I mean, if he knows it, there's no way that the government here in the States doesn't know it. So they're just ignoring that. It just doesn't seem to be wise, right? I'm not advocating to just start, deporting people out here. That's not something that I personally stand for. I don't think that that's the best solution. But when we're talking about these kinds of things happening more and more often, like, there should be some level of wisdom that's being exercised when we're allowing people to come in, right? And I think we should welcome the stranger. That's something that is biblical. That doesn't mean that you should just close your eyes and let everybody come in here. There's got to be a process there. Now, I personally was not aware that Saudi Arabia was this closely aligned with Trump. I think there's some danger there, right? Because we know that some of the things that they stand for are not necessarily good, right? We know that they have a track record of doing things that are just inhumane. So there's got to be, I would argue that there's got to be some discernment there. I don't share the same level of confidence and sentiment that Ayaan does when it comes to what Trump can and can't do. And I want to caution against this idea of kind of seeing him as, for lack of a better word, some sort of messiah. I don't think that that's the best approach. I do think he has some good ideas, But we've seen this before as well. He'll have some good ideas, but he's going to have some bad ones too. If we're going to, advocate for him and cheer him on when he does something right, we need to be just as outspoken when he does something wrong. We have to try to keep just scales, right? That's what the Bible calls us to do. This is talking to Christians here. We have to make sure that we are using just scales. Let me know what you think in the comments. Thanks for tuning in. I'll catch you next time.